Thank you for joining us today here at South Air Network. It has been more than 72 hours since Israel and the United States began their attack on Iran. The U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has justified the strikes by accusing Tehran of building conventional military establishments as a cover for its nuclear ambitions, and he has urged Iranians to take advantage of what he describes as an incredible opportunity. The joint Israeli and U.S. attacks have killed at least 555 people so far, including Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who was assassinated on Saturday. Our correspondent Sarah Gill begins our coverage by taking a look back at his life.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was the most powerful man in Iran. For nearly 40 years, he held ultimate control over the country and a clear mission: to protect the Islamic Republic at all cost. Khamenei was born in 1939 in the holy city of Mashhad to a respected clerical family. At 19, he began studying at a religious seminary in Qom under senior Shia scholars. One of his teachers and mentors was Ruhollah Khomeini, who would go on to lead the 1979 Islamic Revolution and become Iran's first supreme leader. In the early 1960s, Khamenei began taking part in anti-monarchy protests. His fiery anti-Shah and pro-Khomeini speeches led to at least 9 periods of imprisonment. And in 1979, he joined the Islamic Revolution, becoming a key figure. A figure that rose quickly through the political ranks. He served first as Deputy Defense Minister, and in 1981, around 3 months after an attempted assassination left his right arm paralyzed, he was elected as president. In his inauguration speech, he vowed to protect Iran against, quote, deviance, liberalism, and American-influenced left-wingers. In 1989, after Khomeini's death, he was chosen as supreme leader by the Assembly of Experts. A defining feature of his tenure was the establishment of Iran's influence in the region. In the 1990s, he reinforced the existing relationship with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And following the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, he seized the opportunity to widen his axes of resistance, to form a network of alliances eventually stretching across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. But his rule was frequently challenged from within. In 2009, disputed election results sparked the Green Movement, bringing millions into the streets. The government responded with deadly force, a pattern that would repeat in the years to come. In 2022, the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman detained by the morality police, ignited nationwide protests over the country's strict hijab laws. Thousands were killed by government forces, drawing widespread international outrage. After October 7th, 2023, when Hamas launched rockets into Israel and Tel Aviv began its war on Gaza, it also began targeting Iranian officials and its allies that Khamenei spent decades supporting in the region. In June 2025, in a surprise attack, Israel hit Iran, escalating into a 12-day war that saw the US join. A ceasefire was brokered, but Iran had been hit in a way it hadn't seen before. By late December 2025, the country was fracturing internally once again. A collapsing currency and a cost of living crises triggered a new wave of anti-government protests. The state response was a near-total internet blackout and a brutal crackdown that rights groups say left thousands dead. In February 2026, Oman began mediating 3 rounds of indirect talks between Washington and Tehran aimed at reaching a new nuclear deal. But on the eve of further negotiations, in a joint mission, Israel and the United States attacked Iran. On February 28, 2026, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was assassinated. killed in an act of war that has already sparked debate over its legality among US lawmakers. For nearly 4 decades, Khamenei vowed to defend Iran from American and Israeli power. Yet in the end, it was exactly that power which killed him. For some, they are calling this the ultimate justice for a man who ruled with an iron fist over his own people. But for others, it is the exact opposite. It is a martyrdom, the assassination of a leader who stood against Western hegemony in the region. Sarah Gill, South Era Network.
Thank you, Sarah. The fallout from the assassination of Iran's supreme leader is rapidly spreading beyond Iran's borders. Hezbollah fired a barrage of missiles into Israel in retaliation for that killing. So what began as a targeted strike is now threatening to ignite a far wider regional conflict. Muna Khan reports.
The fallout from the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is rapidly spiraling beyond Iran's borders. Early on Monday, Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel, its first attack since the November 2024 ceasefire. It is the clearest sign yet that the killing of Khamenei is pulling the region's most powerful proxies directly into this conflict. This as U.S. and Israeli strikes on Tehran and other key cities enter a third day, with Trump saying the operation is, in his words, ahead of schedule, signaling that the military campaign is far from over. Inside Iran, the government is scrambling to project an image of continuity. An interim leadership council consisting of the president, the chief justice, and a senior religious leader has taken control. But the streets tell a different story, while the state has declared 40 days of national mourning. But on the streets of Tehran, Karaj, and Isfahan, some Iranians were seen celebrating. Beyond Iran's borders, the region is absorbing blow after blow. Iran has struck Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Smoke was seen rising from Dubai's port and the industrial district of Doha. Jordan says it has intercepted dozens of drones and missiles across its airspace. The global reaction is polarized. In Karachi, protesters set fire to the U.S. consulate. In New York's Times Square, Iranian Americans rallied in support of the strikes, waving pre-revolution Iranian flags and chanting for exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Trump has now said he is willing to talk to Iranian leadership, telling The Atlantic, "They want to talk, and I have agreed to talk." But, he added pointedly, they should have done it sooner. He acknowledged U.S. casualties are likely and said there are likely to be more. Yet, uncertainty looms over what the talks will achieve. With Khamenei gone, Iranian military commanders are no longer bound by the political caution of the clerical leadership. Analysts warn they may now respond with greater force, and with capabilities not yet seen in this conflict. Russia and China have condemned the strikes, but for now their support remains rhetorical. What is being discussed behind closed doors in Moscow and Beijing may well determine the ultimate scale of this conflict. The world is now watching Tehran to see if this is the final chapter for the Islamic Republic or the prologue to an even darker era.
Thank you, Muna. And as the shockwaves from the assassination of Iran's supreme leader continue to ripple far beyond Tehran, as you mentioned, fears are mounting that what began as a targeted strike could spiral into a much broader regional confrontation. For more, let's go to defense analyst Alex Scheers, who can bring us analysis from the region. He joins me now from London. Alex, thank you for being here at South Era Network. Given the assassination of Iran's supreme leader and, of course, the immediate tension in the region, how close do you think that the region is to a full-scale military escalation? And what could be the first sign of this targeted strike, that it's turning into an even wider conflict than it already is?
Well, I think we're seeing all the telltale signs of a broadening of the scope of the conflict. Escalation is indeed already taking place, and it really began with the retaliation by the Iranians against several GCC member states. Of course, those initial responses were targeting U.S. military installations in places like Qatar, like Bahrain, Kuwait, and elsewhere. But we've also seen a projectile hit national critical infrastructure. We've seen an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia being set ablaze. And then, of course, there was that horrendous attack that took place against a hotel in the United Arab Emirates. And then to add to that, we've also seen escalation take place in Lebanon with Hezbollah and Israeli forces exchanging fire there. So there is clearly now a form of horizontal escalation in the conflict taking place in the Middle East.
Absolutely. We're seeing it by the hour. Now, what capabilities does Iran have to respond with, both regionally and globally, and how might that shape the next few days?
So the first thing to say is that I think, in my assessment, Iran's missiles capabilities, its kinetic ability to respond, has been severely depleted, and it was already depleted back in June 2025 when Operation Midnight Hammer took place. Its air defense systems were disabled at the time, and then, of course, Israel and the United States were able to establish full spectrum dominance and air superiority on Iran. So what it does have left is a large number of drones that it can still employ across targets in the Middle East, most notably, obviously, on Israel. We saw one drone evade Iron Dome defensive systems just earlier today in Bet Shemesh. So it still can utilize its extensive military drone capabilities as well as its air capabilities. Although we must say that, again, like I said, these have been severely depleted, so we don't know how many of those capabilities it really has left. Now, internationally, it can activate a network of asymmetric and subversive operatives across the Western world and elsewhere to sow all sorts of chaos and disorder. But really, its focus here is use it or lose it. You know, it cannot wait till Israel and the United States completely annihilates its missile capabilities. So its logic here, however flawed, will be to utilize those particular capabilities it has left.
Right, absolutely. I understand what you're saying. Now, in your view, how likely is this crisis to expand into a wider regional war involving groups like Hezbollah or attacks on U.S. bases in the Middle East and then trigger a proxy war between allies? I know, of course, we already mentioned the situation here in Lebanon and how that's expanding as well. But what are you looking at in the future?
Well, I think that conflict is already taking place. A proxy conflict is already being initiated here. And I think what we're seeing is the last vestiges of Iran's ability to wage this sort of subversive operation on countries in the region. I think the conflict will continue to broaden, and it really depends on what the United States' strategic objectives are and how it quantifies those objectives. Is it looking to completely eradicate the political leadership in Iran? What does victory look like for the United States and for Israel? Does it need the likes of the interim supreme leader to surrender? Does it want Pezeshkian to also capitulate? Now that's really what the big question remains to be: is how does this play out, and how do we quantify any sort of notion of mission complete, so to speak?
Right now, looking at a timeline, as far as how long could this possibly last? I know that President Donald Trump mentioned it could last up to a few weeks, maybe even 4 or 5 weeks. What is your take on this?
It's a very difficult thing to answer. It's a very difficult question to answer because it's contingent on how long will the, let's say, whatever's left of the IRGC can sustain its retaliatory efforts. How long does it want to continue in retaliating for the attacks that it first suffered this weekend? And then again, it goes back to what are the strategic objectives of the United States and Israel? When will enough be enough for them, so to speak? And when will we see a satisfactory denouement of the conflict? So this could go on for weeks, and I think it probably will.
Right. Thank you so much, Alex. We truly appreciate you taking the time and, of course, letting us know, sharing your insight at such a critical and volatile moment in history. Now, while the geopolitical fallout continues to unfold, we are also seeing its impact on global markets. In fact, global oil prices have shot up sharply amid the conflict between Iran and the U.S.-Israeli alliance, particularly after shipping through the vital Strait of Hormuz. It was disrupted. So this has fueled growing concerns about broader supply shortages and, of course, inflationary pressures worldwide. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves precisely through the Strait of Hormuz daily. So that's nearly 17 million barrels per day, worth an estimated $3 to $5 billion worth in energy trade specifically. Now, analysts warn that a prolonged closure could push prices above $100 per barrel, adding $10 to $20 to fuel cost in some markets. Now, shipping insurance premiums in the Gulf have reportedly surged by as much as 30 to 50%, driving up global transport and consumer prices. Economists say that the combined impact could intensify inflation and, of course, disrupt already fragile global supply chains. So with so much of the world's energy and goods moving through these strategic checkpoints, the fallout isn't just felt at the pumps. We know it. Airlines, shipping companies, and global trade networks are also taking a major hit, with costly reroutings, cargo delays, and rising operational expenses adding to the economic pressure worldwide. So let's zone in on the airline shutdowns and airspace rerouting. This is costing major carriers millions of dollars per day, with long-haul diversions adding up to $100,000 per flight in extra fuel and operational cost. The disruption is also hitting tourism and global trade, with cargo delays affecting high-value goods like electronics and pharmaceutical industry. Analysts, they actually are warning that prolonged closures could tighten supply chains further. So now, to understand this situation, energy markets expert Maleeha Bengali is joining us from London with the latest on the impact on energy markets and, of course, the wider implications that we are mentioning of the escalation between Iran and the American-Israeli alliance. Thank you so much for joining us. Let us know. We want to ask you directly, who is likely to be most affected by this disruption to energy supplies?
Thank you. Well, the thing about the oil market is that we have a very different oil market now than the prior Gulf crisis or the 1970s oil shock. And I think that is why people get very worried about any supply shocks in the Gulf right now. The biggest losers obviously would be China, because they are the biggest consumers of oil. The biggest suppliers of oil like Russia, US, and would obviously benefit. The market is a bit different right now because since the COVID crisis, the market has been in excess of maybe 5 to 7 million barrels per day. OPEC has been releasing barrels over the last few years, and right now spare capacity is in the region of 3.5 million barrels per day. So there is no oil shortage, and that's what we've been telling our clients all along, that right now you have the Strait of Hormuz, oil is still flowing. We haven't shut it down. So the 20% is at risk, but it's not as important or relevant as it was before. Plus China has become a very different sort of economy altogether. They've stored about billion barrels of oil in its storage right now, anticipating these sort of crises. And its demand has been falling over the last few years, which is why the oil is built up. So the oil price today opened up, 12% on the weekend, and now it's only up 6%. Tells you exactly what the market thinks. There is no oil shock. Having said that, we expect the war to sort of settle down very soon. If there are key infrastructures hit, obviously it's a different thing altogether and the situation's unfolding. But as of right now, the supply is not really in a shortfall. The gas markets are much more important right now because we've seen one of the Saudi refineries got hit, right? And Qatar LNG's called off their production in LNG. That's taking UK gas prices up 50%. That's more of an issue because that's more than 20% of the actual supply of gas. Having said that, the biggest weakness here would be China if this carries on, because Iran sends 90% of its oil to China, and China takes about 20% of its oil from Iran at discounted prices. And that really goes back into exactly why this attack is happening. China has been buying cheaper Iranian crude, and now US, together with Israel, their whole strategy has been to weaken China by forcing them to buy higher priced oil, which is going back to Venezuela as well. So it all sort of comes together as pretty much what the US's strategy is in this region.
Such an interesting analysis. I'm trying to jot down all the numbers that you're mentioning. So what factors are driving the sharp rise in global oil prices exactly, in your opinion?
Right now, the biggest shock would be the Strait of Hormuz, right? So as you mentioned very nicely, that we have about 20% of the world supply going through there. But right now, oil is flowing. Right now, we have Russian ships and Iranian ships still flowing. And prior to the crisis, actually, they increased their shipments. Plus, OPEC has also come out this weekend and said they're going to double their increase of supply. So as I mentioned, there is no shortage. If the war carries on right now with the oil the way it is, we don't see a supply shock. Oil prices around $80 were probably exactly. But not to mention, if things go back to normal, there's about a $10 to $12 per barrel premium sitting in the oil price today because oil price is trading in the high 60s barrel before this crisis started. So you can argue the risk is not for a squeeze. The risk is actually for a sell-off if things sort of de-escalate in the next few days due to pressure on the Gulf states and some sort of a ceasefire if there was one to happen.
I think you already mentioned this when you were touching on the China subject, but why did President Donald Trump take this course of action, in your opinion, and what was he seeking to achieve?
In my opinion, since President Trump has taken power, his entire strategy has been to weaken China. From looking at the tariffs that we started last year to Venezuela, which has been a key supplier of Russian and Chinese crude, to Cuba, to Mexico, and now to Iran, it's all really indirectly weakening China because these are the largest trading partners for China. Indirectly, it's a proxy war, and obviously, if they can't go out and have that war. Iran also has been other issues. There's been talk about the Abraham Accords. Once we actually get the Gulf partners together, there's a chance that Iran was the only one limiting that happening, and this could actually bring them closer together for the greater Israel. So there's been a lot of contentious reports as to the strategy behind it, but there was no need to do this war. Iran actually was doing a very good job in compromising, coming to an agreement, and various reports have shown that the US and Israel has actually planned this weeks and months in advance. So this is actually this is not really a preemptive strike. It's completely against what Iran was trying to work towards. The question really, as everyone was advised, was not the conflict, it was the aftermath, because Iran is not Venezuela. It's going to be a lot more harder to contain, no matter how easy the US government thinks it's going to be doing. And that's the biggest risk in the region as to how soon this will end and what will be the fallout in the Iranian regime.
Thank you so much, Maleeha. Really appreciate you joining us from Italy and helping us make sense of this fast-moving situation, and of course putting some numbers, very important numbers there as well for context. We appreciate your input. Now, for the regional reaction in Lebanon, at least 31 people have been killed in Israeli attacks targeting Hezbollah stronghold areas in areas like Beirut. Sahil Mengani was actually in the region while 2 explosions were heard. Let's go and see what he has to tell us.
This, of course, comes after Iran-backed group Hezbollah launched missiles and drones toward Israel overnight. Was it a sound? Was that an explosion? But we'll figure out. We just heard some explosion, and we are going to find out in explosions in Dahieh. So our camera, I think, was able to capture those explosions in Dahieh. We were just recording a report here in Beirut, and we just heard an explosion that's been captured on camera. So that's what's been happening. We have been listening to sounds of explosions since last night. We woke up. We all here in Beirut and across southern Lebanon woke up to the sound of powerful explosions, blasts that we now know were Israeli missiles striking targets across Lebanon. At least 149 people have received injuries and 31 people have been killed here in Lebanon. The conflict, which began as direct confrontation between the United States, Israel and Iran, is now widening, with Lebanon now emerging as its latest and most volatile fronts. Here's what happened. Israel says that it was targeting Hezbollah positions all across Lebanon. This, of course, follows after Iran-backed group Hezbollah launched missiles and drones toward Israel overnight, describing it as retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader. Even as we speak, people are fleeing Beirut and southern parts of Lebanon amid Israeli strikes. The Israeli military had asked people in nearly 50 villages in eastern and southern Lebanon to evacuate ahead of possible retaliatory strikes. Roads in southern Lebanon and those coming out of Beirut suburbs remain gridlocked on Monday as people fled. Israel says that fighting Hezbollah would take many more days adding that when responding to a possible question about ground invasion, it said that all options are on the table, adding that Hezbollah did a very big mistake and that it would pay a very big price. Israel last week had issued indirect warnings to Lebanon, saying that if Hezbollah attacked Israel, then Israel would hit Lebanon hard, including Lebanon's airport and other key civilian infrastructure. That warning is unfolding in real time. Economically, there's a lot of bad news coming in. Stock markets are in dread. Crude oil prices are soaring. So the conflict is widening. The region is on edge. And for people here in Lebanon, uncertainty hangs heavy in the air. Tensions are rising by the hour, and many fear that the worst may still lie ahead. For South Iran Network, I am Sahil Murli Meghani.
Thank you for that report, Sahil. Your coverage definitely helps bring the situation on the ground with those attacks right there in the area of Beirut, bringing a clear focus for our viewers here at South Iran Network to understand what the situation is like here in Lebanon. So the Lebanese government actually has officially announced an immediate ban on all military and security activities by Hezbollah. Definitely worth mentioning as well. So to more, U.S. President Donald Trump has justified the joint U.S.-Israeli attack by claiming that Iran's weapons are a threat to America and, of course, the entire world. But is there really any evidence to support this? Angat Singh tells us more.
On Sunday, President Trump announced the deaths of 3 American soldiers and Iran's supreme leader in a speech that was defending the U.S. and Israel's bombing campaign of Iran. But Trump signaled that this fight will continue, even if it's likely to cost more American lives, because he justified it as self-defense.
An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be a dire threat to every American.
But does the evidence support imminent danger? A Defense Intelligence Agency assessment last year concluded that Iran could develop an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the U.S. mainland by around 2035, if it chose to pursue that path. But a potential long-term threat, and not an immediate one, is not typically the standard of what justifies preemptive war under international law. And on the nuclear front, Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, had claimed that Iran was a week away from bomb-making material. But independent experts interviewed by PolitiFact express deep skepticism about that timeline. And it's worth noting that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that Iran was close to a bomb for more than 3 decades. It's this repeated urgency over such long periods of time that complicate claims of a sudden existential threat, much like the boy who cried wolf. Trump is also framing the campaign in moral terms.
They have waged war against civilization itself. This is the duty and the burden of a free people.
This rhetoric is reminiscent of the white man's burden, which justified U.S. domination as moral obligation at the turn of the 20th century. But it's reports of civilian casualties, more than 100 at a girls' school alone since the strikes began, that risk undermining that particularly righteous framing, especially as Trump closed his speech with a call for ordinary Iranians to rise up.
I call upon all Iranian patriots who yearn for freedom to seize this moment, to be brave, be bold, be heroic, and take back your country. America is with you.
History suggests that American regime change operations, from Iraq to Libya to Syria, have produced instability rather than democracy for the people who live there. And without an articulated endgame, Trump's call reads like an open-ended wager. But maybe that's the point. Because beneath the stated reasons of self-defense, morality, and democracy that justify both this intervention now and the one in Venezuela months ago, there's another unstated common denominator. Trump has been going after oil-rich regimes whose biggest client was China, America's biggest adversary, who happens to be heavily reliant on imported oil.
Thank you so much, Angat, for that information. Of course, we have more news from around the world, and we want to focus on that right now. at least three people this is what we've been reporting, are dead and 14 wounded after a gunman opened fire outside a bar on Austin 6th Street. The suspect, 53-year-old Nyara Diagne, was wearing clothing with an Iranian flag design before being shot by police. The FBI is now investigating it as a potential act of terrorism after finding an additional Iranian flag and photos of Iranian leaders at his home. Though officials note he also had a history of mental health issues, and that's what we know. The attack came just one day after the U.S. and Israel launched major strikes on Iran. And the Pentagon has signed a deal with OpenAI to deploy its technology on the U.S. Defense Department's classified network. So with OpenAI saying the agreement includes additional safeguards to protect its use cases, the move comes after President Trump directed the government to stop working with rival AI lab Anthropic and ordered the Pentagon to declare it a supply chain risk. A major blow to the startup that says it will challenge any such designation in court. And sinners upset one battle after another to win the top prize at the 32nd Actor Awards Sunday night in Los Angeles, California, with Michael B. Jordan and Jessie Buckley taking home the individual film acting honors. On television, The Pit and The Studio won the drama and comedy ensemble prizes respectively, while Catherine O'Hara received a posthumous award for The Studio just a month after her death at 71, with co-star Seth Rogen accepting a standing ovation. Harrison Ford rounded out the night by receiving the Guild's highest honor, the Life Achievement Award, introduced, of course, by his friend Woody Harrelson. And we've got more. Thank you so much for joining us today at the South Air Network. Of course, we have much more content and news for you right here on our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time with much more.